Ukrainian officials say more than 500 people, including 28 children, have been rescued so far from flooded villages along the Dnipro River. But the areas near the devastating dam collapse remain under active shelling, making every rescue attempt extremely dangerous. Have a listen to this.
And the Russian here.
President Zelensky surveyed the destruction for himself on Thursday and said rescue crews were working non-stop to reach as many stranded people as possible. In his nightly address, Mr. Zelensky had harsh words for Russia's leader.
This man-made disaster at the Novokakhovka hydroelectricity plant is not a natural disaster or a manifestation of the climate crisis. The disaster is Putin. What he does, what he personally orders to do.
Meanwhile, Russia's military claims its forces were engaged in a major battle early Thursday in the Zaporizhzhia region. We get more now from CNN's Fred Platkin.
Breaking news on Kremlin-controlled TV, claiming Moscow's forces are facing massive attacks in southern Ukraine.
Ukrainian forces attacked with NATO tanks and light armored vehicles. Our army has fought off these attacks.
Russia's defense ministry releasing aerial videos like this one, allegedly showing their forces targeting advancing Ukrainian formations in the Zaporizhzhia region. Moscow also claims to have taken out a modern Western anti-aircraft radar system close to the front line. On a visit to an arms depot, Russia's defense minister urging faster weapons deliveries. The enemy tried to advance today, he says, so this equipment is needed. Let's hurry up. While the Ukrainians have not confirmed offensive operations and CNN can't independently verify the specific Russian claims, U.S. officials have told CNN the Russians are putting up stiff resistance. Ukraine's leadership says they understand their counteroffensive will be long and tough, and they'll need lots of armor to penetrate Russia's defenses. They showed us this repair and modification shop where they fix up mostly vehicles captured from the Russians, including this modern troop transporter. Even with all the Western equipment that the Ukrainians have already received, they still have a lot less than the Russians do. That's why every tank and every armored vehicle that they can get back on the battlefield will be vital for Ukraine's war effort. That includes even seemingly destroyed vehicles like this blown-up armored personnel carrier, the project manager tells me.
All this vehicle we can restore and return to the units.
Further along the southern front line, the situation in the areas flooded by the recent destruction of a major dam is deteriorating. Ukraine and Russia accusing each other of targeting operations to rescue flood victims. Ukraine's chief rabbi dodging for cover as shells rain down.
To bring people here from all over the river, and the Russian here.
The Ukrainians say several people were wounded in Kherson as the authorities continue to fight to bring those stranded to safety. Fred Platkin, CNN, Zaporizhzhia, Ukraine.
Now, among those on the front lines, the war in Ukraine is likely taking a heavy mental toll on both sides, particularly the Russians, with new wartime policies that temporarily bar active duty and mobilized soldiers from leaving service. Joining me now from Washington to talk more about this, Darren Mascott, who is Senior Policy Researcher with the RAND Corporation and wrote a fascinating article in The Economist about this. And you wrote that Russia is and will be facing, in your words, a social crisis of veteran mental health disorders. You called it a ticking time bomb. Explain what you mean.
I did. So most Russian soldiers fighting in Ukraine right now, whether they're officers or active duty or mobilized, they are prohibited from leaving the military. And so they are sitting there and sustaining combat trauma with no relief. Eventually, these restrictions will be lifted and they will return back to Russia, where they are likely to face inadequate care. And we know that this population, if they have sustained combat trauma, if they do not receive appropriate care for PTSD, they are at higher risk of substance abuse, domestic problems, job problems, and they're prone to other mental disorders and physical disorders down the road.
Yeah.
And I want to point out that the Ukrainians are experiencing this as well.
I was just going to ask you about that. Of course, the Ukrainian people and military experiencing PTSD and other traumas as well. I saw it myself over there. Are there differences, though, in how the two sides deal with the issue?
There is. And so my area of specialty is on the Russian military, so I wrote about that. But to describe briefly what the Ukrainians are experiencing, it's not only the Ukrainian military, it's also the Ukrainian people. So the citizens themselves have to live in a situation where their cities are being shelled or they're under missile strikes. They've lost loved ones or their loved ones are fighting. They've been displaced internally or they're living abroad now. So it's really a cumulative and stacking traumas that they need help with. Not just military, but also civilian. The needs are vast.
Yeah. And is there any indication that Russian authorities are dealing with the issue in any meaningful way, treating it? And how could untreated or inadequately treated combat trauma play out in Russian society?
Russia does not have a strong history for caring for its combat veterans. Yeah. This stems back from World War II. It happened in Afghanistan. It happened in Chechnya. They do not receive adequate care for their physical wounds or their mental wounds. And essentially they fall into, they are people with severe PTSD. And the rest of Russian society began to be very afraid of them and very alienated from them, which makes the problem worse. It's a little different now. There is institutional knowledge about PTSD in Russia, and they're taking some preliminary steps to try to set up some programs for these veterans once they return home. But I think it's going to be overwhelmed by sheer numbers.
Yeah. And we mentioned, that Russian law now makes it illegal to not just leave the service, but to discredit or criticize the armed forces. Is that likely to discourage soldiers from even seeking treatment or being honest about their conditions when they have that sort of thing in front of them?
It is. So mental health wellness is not really something that's part of Russian military culture right now. So most soldiers are probably not going to even seek out that type of care. They'll tend to deal with it on their own, whether that's through alcoholism or social isolation. But for those who do reach out, given the climate in Russia right now, there are Russian therapists who may not want to work with this population. They may object to the war morally, or they may not want to overhear a patient say or discuss things like war crimes or things they witnessed or did that could potentially put that therapist in some kind of legal liability. So there's many layers to this thing where it's not a particularly neutral environment for those who even seek health in the first place.
That's a really important point. We're nearly out of time, but I wanted to ask you, with its control over the media and the crushing of any dissent, the Kremlin has, long fought to keep the impact of the war on Russia from Russians, from the general population. Is there any sign of cracks in that strategy? And as, people with PTSD come home, is that likely to contribute to any cracks?
Absolutely. I mean, it's in the West, it's called a stop-loss policy, where people can't leave the military service because at war because of numbers that aren't stable or holding. Eventually, these people will be released back to their towns and villages across Russia. And so these problems will be there, whether they want to admit it now or not. Currently, the Russians are not discussing how many casualties are out there. The numbers they have are artificially low. Even though burials are being conducted in the open, people know the numbers are not accurate. All of these, the fuse is lit. All of these chickens are going to come home to roost.
Yeah. Dara Mascott, always great to get you on, and your analysis. Great piece in The Economist. People should read it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.